Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the living room. I'm Jason Silverman, and we're really grateful to be here with you tonight for this very special program celebrating Ballet Russe. I hope you all got a chance to see the amazing film. I'm still feeling, soft and lovely. I feel a glow from watching that again. It's one of my favorite documentaries. And so we're in for a real treat tonight with our conversation about the film. I hope you are all staying safe. And I want to say thank you and congratulations to Santa Fe for taking such good care of each other. The times I've been out in public, everyone seems to be wearing their masks. And tomorrow night is restaurant night outdoors again. So I know we've got a long way to go before this is a memory, but really grateful to be living in a community that takes our neighbors so seriously, and we're taking such good care of each other. So thank you. We have a couple wonderful programs coming up in the living room. The Future of Museums on Thursday. That's going to be a fantastic panel discussion. We have a wonderful program celebrating cave art with some of the great archaeologists who have discovered and protected some of the cave art around the world. That's on Sunday. And on Tuesday, a week from tonight, we're going to be jumping back to one of our favorite romantic comedies, The Tao of Steve, shot here in Santa Fe by Santa Feans. So visit our website for all the details on those and more programs through the living room. We're very grateful tonight to have two of Santa Fe's most beloved nonprofit presenting organizations joining us. The NDI, National Dance Institute, is here. Liz Salganik, the NDI at New Mexico Dance Barn's artistic director, and Rodney Rivera, Dance Barn's artistic director, are here to say hello. And then we're going to talk to Joel Alberts from the Lensic. So Liz and Rodney, please jump in.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for including us and inviting us to be a part of this. I appreciate the opportunity to share what NDI has been up to in the last couple of months and what we have in store. We've been staying connected to the thousands of children and teens who are part of our dance programs in Santa Fe, as well as all over the state, Albuquerque, Espanola, and statewide. We've been doing live Zoom classes in ballet and jazz and modern and hip hop. We've been creating video packets of our outreach teaching methodology that has been sent out to public school teachers and principals all over the state, and have gotten kids dancing in their living rooms to those videos at home. And we celebrated our first virtual gala a few weeks back, where we got over 400 video submissions from our dancers and their families dancing together for a world premiere piece of choreography that we edited together from all of these beautiful students and their parents and siblings dancing at home. So it's been quite an extraordinary time for everyone, and been a really interesting and creative time, I think, for the dance community to shift in such a big way to a virtual platform. And we've really been just focused on keeping kids dancing and staying connected to the heart of what we know is beautiful and joyful and teaches so many life lessons in dance. So we're proud to be a part of the community in Santa Fe and looking forward to offering more online programs this summer. And Rodney Rivera, maybe I can segue and introduce him. Rodney Rivera is the director of our Dance Barns programs, our after-school programs here in Santa Fe. He started working with us this fall, has danced all over the world, choreographed and directed companies around the world, and we're really, really lucky to have him working with our students now in Santa Fe. He can tell you a little bit about the way we've been staying connected to our advanced dancers in particular.
Sure. Good evening, and thank you so much for having us tonight. we have been doing everything. I'm so proud of our team. In a couple of days, probably 2 or 3 days, we just changed our way of working, and we just adapted to this new way of working and getting engage our students, and to touch their heart through dance. Actually, we'll celebrate tomorrow our seniors graduation. It'll be a virtual ceremony. As Liz just said, we'll have a beautiful program for the summer, which includes all kinds of styles of dance like jazz, hip hop, all ages. And actually, during this period, we offer classes for the families too. So parents will be enjoying the summer as they are being enjoying right now, like Zumba classes or salsa classes or jazz, things like that. So thank you so much again. And we are at NDI always for you. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm just going to introduce Joel here. Joel is the executive director of the Lensic. And Joel, we can't wait to get back into your space. Thanks for keeping the fires burning during lockdown.
You are very welcome. It's nice to be here. I decided to come down to the Lensic tonight instead of making this a Zoom background like would be the easy way out. But it's so nice to be partnering with this program this evening. One of the things that we appreciate so much about the work that we do at the Lensic is the support that we give to the other arts nonprofits in Santa Fe for events that happen here, and doing things like tonight where we're engaged talking about the performing arts in these other mediums. We have, for a calendar that is a lot less busy than it was before, we certainly are keeping our schedules probably fuller than ever with a variety of other things that we're continuing to do here. We, of course, have a major commitment to arts education at the Lensic. We engage 18,000 school kids every year in arts education programs that take place both in the classroom and at events that happen here at the Lensic. Finally, as we're wrapping up this year, we had a couple of exciting things, both giving a scholarship to one of the technical theater interns who's going to be going on to college to study technical theater after doing 2 years of amazing work with us here. And then just a little over a week ago, we had our Future Voices program, Lensic Future Voices, which is a photo and film competition that takes place in high schools across northern New Mexico. And we had our mini Academy Awards virtually this year, showing all of the movies and photos that the winners took. And it was a very exciting way to wrap up that program in a sort of unorthodox way as life is giving us these days. But if you get an opportunity, certainly we are a community-supported performing arts center. We're really focused on the community right now. We have a new series that's also taking place right here on the Lensic stage called our Ghost Light Sessions. We're inviting area musicians to come and share a song or 2 or 3 with us, which we're posting online. We're also, again, supporting the public schools and letting the high school students who'd been preparing end-of-the-year performances, giving them an opportunity to come to this stage and to present that final song or dance. A really incredible collection of art forms that these students are sharing with us as well. So we're super busy. We definitely miss our community, and I will echo what Jason said. You know, the most important thing: stay healthy. We want to see you back here as soon as possible, and we will be ready with a lot of great things to do when the time is right. Thanks again for having us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Joel, Rodney, and Liz. And I'm really proud to be part of this this nonprofit community, this community in general. It's been incredible to see the generosity. I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce tonight's guests. Davia Nelson, I've had a chance to work with just a little bit, and it's always been such a pleasure. Those of you who listen to NPR, which is probably most of you, I would imagine, know her as half of the Kitchen Sisters. In addition to 100 other amazing things she's done in her career. She's been making memorable radio programs since 1979, including the Peabody Award, 2-time Peabody Award winning program Lost and Found Sound, which I know a lot of you heard. Davia, thanks for being here. And we have 2 legends of the documentary film world. Dana Goldfein and Dan Geller have made 8 documentary features that have helped shape our understanding of American film. They've won a long list of awards, including 2 Emmys. They also deserve an award, which we should all celebrate tonight, for staying married for 34 years. They're celebrating their 34th anniversary tonight. We're really grateful that they're having this romantic evening with all of us in the living room. Please welcome Davia, Dan, and Dana.
Thank you. Such a pleasure, such an honor to be here. Dan and Dana, what I want to ask you is, how did you get lured into the Ballet Russe? What lured you there? How did that piece of history get on your radar?
Actually, it was through Bob Hawke, who is a longtime friend and ultimately is the associate producer on the film. He came to us and said that he had gotten wind of this amazing reunion that was going to occur in the spring of, or June of 2000, where all the Ballet Russe dancers, who were of course then in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, were going to be coming together for the first time in 50 years in New Orleans. And Bob said that his friend who was coordinating this reunion had just been musing over whether there was a documentary hidden in there somewhere. And Bob said, well, I have these 2 friends in San Francisco, and I don't know how much they know about ballet, but they're the kind of filmmakers who would pick up their camera and microphone and trade in some air miles and just pop over to New Orleans to film this reunion. And that's really how it happened. Do you want to say anything?
Well, yeah, the other thing was that Dana and I, the first film we made together, actually it's appropriate on our 34th wedding anniversary to say that we took some our honeymoon money and applied it to starting to make the first film we made together, which is the only other dance film we've made, about Isadora Duncan, her life and her art, and how the 2 aspects wove together. And so we hadn't made a film since then about dance, and we ran into a friend of ours, Christopher Stoll, who's a well-known dancer and artistic director, at a premiere of another movie we had just put into theaters, and he said, well, you guys know nothing about ballet. And so before we got too far into starting the Ballet Russe movie, he would sneak us in the stage door at SF Ballet pretty much every night and give us a crash course in ballet history. And it was a privilege beyond belief to be able to absorb the world of ballet directly through choreographers and dancers with the San Francisco Ballet.
And then I want to say, we didn't know, obviously, much about ballet in general, but especially about the Ballet Russe, and we decided that leading up to the June reunion, we would interview a few of the dancers and just see if we really thought that there was a film there. And so we flew to New York, and the very first day of our interviews, we did Raven Wilkinson in the morning, and she told her amazing story about being the first African-American ballerina touring through the South in, the days of Jim Crow, 1950s. And then the second person later that day, we just packed up our equipment and ran across Manhattan, was Freddie Franklin. And so, instantly after one day of filming, we said, if the same company incorporated both Raven's story and then this amazing, guy from Liverpool who can just tell you fabulous stories from morning to night, obviously there's a film here.
So even before you got to New Orleans, you were already leaning in that direction, heading down that road?
Yeah, because we just wanted to make absolutely sure that there were characters. I mean, that's the most important thing. Even though you're dealing with real life when you're making a documentary, you still think in terms of, are there people that kind of leap off the screen and can be real life characters?
Yeah. Can I just say to all of you watching tonight, thank you so much for tuning in, for joining us, and we'll take your questions. It'll be me asking questions, but you too can ask questions. We won't hear you, but if you put them in the chat line, in the Q&A line, we'll take them and we'll see them and we'll incorporate them into it, because I'm sure you're as curious as I am about this. So what's your process once you kind of say to yourselves, okay, I think we're on to something? What begins to happen? How do you begin to talk to one another? And does one of you have doubts? Does one of you is there a back and forth in that moment? Was there with this, or were you both all in?
It's often there's a difference where one or the other of us will be more keen in the very beginning stages. But on this one, we both right away, I felt with Freddie and with Raven, and as we started to meet Irina Baranova, George Zorge, these people actually became our friends, which is usually what happens when we make our movies. They become lifelong friends. So there wasn't that time of, gee, I wonder if there's a movie here. I mean, it was really clear there was a movie. And we just wanted to get as many people as we could, both at the reunion and then travel around the world and pick them up in their homes, and in Freddie's case in Cincinnati when he was setting works there. So the real problems came in the editing, which was it was a bear of a movie to take all these characters, 20, 25 different characters, 50 years of history, confusing names of companies that it wasn't Diaghilev, but it was after Diaghilev, but then there was this Ballet Russe and another Ballet Russe, and tell a coherent story. So it was in the editing where I think sometimes we were out of phase with each other about, can we ever make this into a watchable movie?
I was going to say it was a 2-year editing process, and there were definitely many, many dark nights of the soul that we both had to sort of journey through. Luckily, I think we alternated those dark nights, although there were some that we shared, which is always, a nightmare. But yeah, across that 2 years, there were so many moments when we looked at each other and said, do we have a film here? How are we going to ever tie all these pieces together? We don't want to cut out any characters, any of the Ballet Russe dancers that we want to include as many as we can. And it's very unwieldy. There's ultimately about 20 in there. And that's just an unwieldy number of people to try to fashion a coherent narrative arc around.
I think that's one of the strongest pieces of the film for me, is how you keep introducing characters, how they keep coming in, how the whole group unfolds. Just when you think you know who your cast is, someone new appears and you linger with them. There's room for everybody in this movie in some deep way.
Thank you so much. And again, that was because, it's the curse and the beauty of being independent filmmakers. This was a total labor of love from beginning to end. As I said, Bob Hawke said, here are these two filmmakers, they'll use their frequent flyer miles to just jet around the world.
I'd like to have to jump in, because whenever in the early days when we were rolling this movie out into theaters around the world, and Bob happened to be in the audience and or on panel with us, and Dana would say that, Bob would get really upset. And he would say, that's not why he recommended us. He said, yeah, of course you do that, but he recommended us because he just thought we would be in simpatico with the material and with the people and be able to engage with it. So
that's true. Okay, I'm sorry. But right. But very true. He obviously thought we could make the movie. But the beauty of really doing it on our own and just sort of working our way through this as two independents is we got to take those 2 years to edit it, which is a big gift. And I realize it more and more, especially in these days when, there's kind of a renaissance for documentaries and they're all over the place. And there's a lot more outlets for them to be seen and shown. And that comes along with people breathing down your throat a lot more. And so I think that the luxury of spending 2 years trying to tease out how to introduce 20 different characters, because that does not happen the first time through.
When I first met Dana and Dan, it was 2004, and they were working on this film, and I do radio stories and they have a lot of archival audio in them. And Dana and I were seated next to each other at a dinner, and she was telling me, I was saying, well, how are you finding all your footage? Like, where do you get all this archival footage of the Ballet Russe? And she said, well, I'm on eBay right now and I'm bidding on some footage. And I thought to myself, who is this woman that has thought to go on eBay searching for footage for the telling of the story? That had never come to my mind. And I thought, I want to be her friend. I like the way she moves. So I thought we could begin, Jason, with a clip. and kind of savor the benefits of all these various searches they were doing for archival audio.
Though the little Russian girls worked hard to perfect their technique, in late 1929, their future in dance held little promise. For the only grand ballet company in all of Europe had just collapsed. Sergei Diaghilev's Ballet Russe. Diaghilev was a Russian exile in Paris, who for 20 years had led a creative revolution that brought together the most brilliant artists of his day. Nijinsky, Balanchine, Stravinsky, Picasso, Matisse, and Ravel were but a few who collaborated with Diaghilev to create the distinctive Ballet Russe style. Groundbreaking productions that fused the most avant-garde in music, movement, and design. So great was his influence that when Diaghilev died suddenly in 1929, there were those who believed that with him died ballet.
Okay, well, I guess that wasn't archival footage. Those were archival photographs. But Dana, I wonder, well, if both of you could talk about that technique of where you were gleaning this imagery, this footage from.
Actually, you know, it was a lot of those images did indeed come from eBay, because what I discovered is that people were selling old Ballet Russe. First of all, the Ballet Russe programs were as gorgeous as the Ballet Russe productions, and the covers of those programs were painted by, you know, all the same amazing people like Dali, et cetera, who were doing Picasso, who were doing the actual sets and costumes. So on eBay, over the course of that 2-year editing period, I bought literally every single Ballet Russe program, and in those programs, a lot of those gorgeous photos that you just saw were discovered, or, you know, we scanned them in and whatever. So I would say we found that even more than we found actual archival footage. The footage we found really all over the world. We discovered that there were these 2 Australian doctors who had fallen in love with the Ballet Russe when they came with the De Basel Ballet Russe when they came and toured through Australia in the 40s. And they had, with their little 16mm cameras, filmed these dancers, both on stage and off. And so, you know, through lots and lots of legwork and looking through online archives, we found a lot of that kind of footage.
Which one, what was the jewel when you found that kind of piece of archival footage that was the holy grail, where you went, oh, here it is?
Well, the Australian footage was really interesting because those doctors had money, so they could buy color film. So to have color film shot, you know, from the audience and from the wings, because they were given special permission, at that time was extraordinary. You could there really isn't much color film at all of the Ballet Russe. So that really was in many ways the gem. But there were so many of them. The New York Public Library of Performing Arts had great material that we got, but also Anne Barzell.
I was just going to say Anne Barzell.
Who was a dance critic in Chicago and lived well into her 90s. Anne had a wind-up Ballets camera with black and white footage, and she was, anytime the Ballet Russe would come to Chicago, she was their darling in a way. She would film from the audience, she would film from the wings, and then she had donated the footage to a public library in Chicago. But, you know, she had control over the footage to just be able to let us do whatever we wanted, and we needed to have it scanned because it was still in a celluloid format. And she would wheel this heavy oak cart from the stacks of the library, and then began putting can after can of film into shopping bags. And we said, well, Anne, what are you doing? She said, well, you'll just take it with you, and then you'll give it back when you've scanned it. And so we thought, Jesus, you know, I don't think this is legit, but we're not saying anything. And we went to the front exit, and the security guard was there, and he said, well, what do you got there? And Annie, he would call her, and she's about 2 feet tall at the time. And she said, these are just my friends. It's, it's some footage. And he just shrugged his shoulders, and we walked out with this incredible footage, which we did give back.
And actually, Anne then agreed to sit for an interview, which we filmed at the library in Chicago, where she was letting us abscond with all of her footage. And so a lot of the footage comes from that. I think the moment, it's not even a dance moment, but I find it so incredibly poignant and beautiful. When we were filming Ivan Chouteau and Miguel Terekhov at their little place in Oklahoma, Miguel let us know that he had shot some 8mm footage, and he didn't know where it was. And we literally tore his house apart while we were staying with him that weekend, and we found it. And there's this moment when Ivan Chouteau tells this story about what it was like to be 14, and as exciting as it was to be on the road with the Ballet Russe, she missed her family so much. And she said, even to this day, she can still hear the sound of the train whistle taking her away. And there's this footage that Miguel had shot of her, which is so ethereal and so gorgeous. And she's a young woman, and she's just turning slowly to look at the camera. And that's one of my favorite little pieces of footage.
I also thought it was stunning how you framed the film with essentially the same scenes, sort of in reverse almost, and brought us into that world, that one dancer, that series of footage, and then bringing it to close. How did that inspiration come?
That was Alicia Markova. And this is the thing that was so amazing, is that we, when she said that amazing line, which is, suddenly something opens and I see everything as it happened then. And she was actually describing for us what it was like to be in her 90s and to have her memory kind of flitting in and out. And yet she still had this privilege of seeing this incredible, parade that was her life. So she said that. And then just a few minutes later, she said the line that is the end, where she says, I didn't have very much money, and I didn't have this, and I didn't have that, but with Picasso and Stravinsky, et cetera, think how rich I am. Those two comments happened within minutes of her.
I remember getting chills, and because we shot 2 interviews with Alicia, and I remember when she said those 2 interviews, Dana and I just sort of shot glances at each other. I shoot, Dana does sound. We just glanced at each other, knowing that, oh my God, this is defining everything. And then visually, that clip, in essence, it's a dancer spinning in from infinity. And
it's actually,
it's Alicia, right?
Yeah.
And then at the end, it's the dancer spinning out to infinity again. And it just felt that ethereal nature that is dance was evoked in that clip of this, evanescence coming and going.
So sometimes you are given a gift. Both of those comments on Alicia's part happened not in response to any question. It was just, in between interview questions, she was just pondering these 2 concepts, one about memory and one about how lucky her life had been, even if it wasn't the most materially rich life.
It's just so stunning. I just want to say to all of you watching, if I'm not seeing the questions, if there are questions, maybe Jason, if you want to text me, if for some reason they're not making it to the chat, I'm happy to look at my text to see, okay, they are in chat. Okay, I'm going to open chat.
Right, good.
But I'm looking at chat, but I'm not seeing.
I saw one question was about why we chose to only have the Diaghilev era so briefly.
Okay, good.
When he was, in fact, of course, so important to the history of ballet.
And the answer is that the people who are alive, other than Alicia, who is the one connection back to Diaghilev era, were the ones we wanted to tell the story through. So we couldn't really go back to Diaghilev. There had been other pieces and a lot of history written about Diaghilev, and that the Ballet Russe reunion itself, which triggered the whole project, was a reunion of the successor companies from Diaghilev's original company. So we felt that we certainly needed to show the root of the tree, right? and had to find a way to do that to make clear that there was this moment with a man named Diaghilev who created this extraordinary institution. But that's why it's a smaller portion of the movie.
And also, we felt like, well, that it was true just in that really it would have been hard to do a Diaghilev story in the first person, as Dan said, but also we felt like the story of the Ballet Russe post Diaghilev hadn't really been told. And a lot of people didn't know that there were these multiple dance companies that were trying, valiantly to place little kernels of ballet all around the world, and that in a lot of ways we owe them lots of gratitude for the fact that ballet exists all over the world. And it was a really difficult journey that they had to take. They had to give up a lot to just go train, from train to train and village to village, little town to little town. So we felt like that was a story that was worth telling. To fit the Diaghilev part in was one of the hardest things in the editing, like where to put it. We had lots of cuts where the whole film opened with Diaghilev, and then that didn't seem to work. And then, there were times when it was a longer part of the film and a shorter part of the film. So ultimately it found its way to the little clip area that we showed. But yeah, it's not that we don't acknowledge Diaghilev's importance.
He looms large. I was thinking if you were making a feature film, would it have been Orson Welles that played Diaghilev? What Russian actor? Then I even thought Raul Julia could have somehow been Diaghilev.
Absolutely. Oh, Raul Julia, totally. Yeah.
Yes, we love dance. David Vogel has a question, some of it which we've answered, but he says, of all the remarkable dancers you interviewed, which of them were you most moved by? Thank you for sharing this wonderful piece of work. And he says your documentary is exquisite.
Thank you, David. We might have different characters.
Well,
I don't know.
I can answer. There are people that we became close friends with. So Freddie Franklin and Irina Baranova, Freddie and Irina, Yvonne Chouteau and Miguel Terrakoff, they became dear friends well after. And they're all fantastic in the film. Raven as well. The stories are, each person told a story that in some ways along the line knocked me flat. So I can't even answer it. I love them all.
Wow, I know it's hard to separate my friendships, because ultimately I would say the two that we became the closest with and had the deepest friendship that lasted well beyond the film, in fact, until they each passed away. Those two would have been Freddie, who we never missed an opportunity to see when we were in Manhattan. And then Irina Baranova, who, because we fell in love with her so much, we ended up going to Australia multiple times, mostly just to hang out with Irina, because she was such a fabulous and moving human being. But they all, Natalie Krasovska, the moment in the beginning of the film where she walks us into her studio and she's just so proud of that studio. And it's just, through her kitchen. The fact that there was this woman who was in her mid-80s who every day got up and didn't feel like she'd really lived unless she did a bar in her own little studio. I just find that really moving today.
I think let's go to another clip, another one of the women that you were introducing, and just see how you were bringing these characters. And as you say, with Natalie's life, this is her life with her world now. Well, now back in the early 2000s. Let's go to our second clip and take that in.
Front and fifth, side, fifth, front, fifth, side, plie, arch, fifth, side, plie, arch.
Don't ask me why, but there is something so moving to me about Tanya driving away in that kind of beater Mustang convertible with her little Charlie Chaplin swing of her cane as she's leaving, and that she's still teaching, that the legacy is still moving through her into young people in Beverly Hills in the 2000s.
And you know, those students actually came and grabbed us right after she finished class. We sort of wanted to film her leaving, as you say, in her Chaplin-esque way. And then the students grabbed us and they said, don't stop. You've got to run outside because she's got this amazing red Mustang. So
I remember we were staying with friends in LA. Dana and I live in San Francisco. We were staying with friends in LA. And the next morning, after we had shot that scene with Tanya, I woke myself up giggling. I had never done this in my life. I woke up, I realized, what's that sound? And I was laughing and giggling because I felt so unbelievably thrilled to have been able to witness that moment, be in that scene, feel the joy and love coming from Tanya to her students and back the other way, and the synchronicity of, you know, her movement, the cane going, the car, all of it. I remember waking up thinking, giggling myself awake, thinking, I can't imagine anything else I'd rather do than do this kind of thing right now.
You know, there's a piece of that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Dana. There's a piece of that scene that I wish was, that we had just seen, where you're interviewing her. Do you want to just describe that little moment when she says to you about her life?
Oh yeah, actually that's what I was going to say, is I had hoped that it would go just that little bit further.
Yeah, me too.
It explains so much why she was there teaching. And she says, we asked her why she's still doing what she's doing, and she's sitting in her armchair and she's like, well, what else would I do? Sell books, sell fruit? And it's this incredulous, you know, like, why would I do anything else? And, you know, we were so lucky that we got her then, because I think within 6 months, she died, and she died the way that she wanted to. She taught that class and she like left, and that was it.
It was not a car accident.
No, it was not a car accident. No, but I mean, she really taught until the last day of her life. She was doing bar with those students. And actually, one of the really interesting little tidbits, she wasn't there that day, but every day, other than the day we were filming, Sid Charisse came and took that class with Tanya.
Oh, to have been a fly on that wall.
I know.
That I would love to have seen. Well, can you speak to that piece of it, the kind of these dancers who dance up until the last moment, who never stop moving, who never stop that spirit? What you were thinking as you were making it, what you learned from them?
Well, I felt that what I had started to see is that if you're lucky enough to have found early in life something that you are deeply passionate about doing or aiding in some way, and are able to continue in some fashion doing or aiding that, and not necessarily dance until you're well in your 90s the way that Freddie Franklin did, doing character roles with ADT into his 90s, but teaching, coaching, whatever it may be. But if you can stay attached to that thing that you were passionate about, that it sure seemed that virtually everybody we filmed and talked to as part of this movie who were Ballet Russe dancers in their 80s and 90s were luminous, just radiated a joy about life, whatever hardships they may have had financially afterward, because these were not people who made a lot of money, health-wise, as age began to get them, because even if you keep moving, things are going to happen. But there was this radiant energy around them that, to me, was something I not only wanted to be able to share with other people, but wanted to hold on to for something, if I'm so lucky to get to my 80s and 90s and have that kind of not only lust for life, but the ability to bring that kind of joy to other people.
And for me, I said to Dan, I think we were about 6 months into the project. We had definitely filmed in New Orleans. And I turned to him and I said, I now know why. Like, there's always a reason that is an underlying, often inchoate reason for why we're making whatever film we choose to make. I mean, these are like 2 to 5 year long adventures. So there has to be some emotional component. And I said to Dan, I know I figured out for me the emotional component of this journey that we're on making Ballet Russe, and it's that I'm about to turn 40, and I'm clearly looking for role models in the aging process. And look what we've found. I mean, I still think about all of those dancers as I am fortunate enough to continue getting older, as the most vibrant examples of how to age gracefully and age in a way where you're still completely involved with the world.
And vibrant and soulful. Let's go, there's another clip I want to bring in now because it brings in a whole other piece of the story, and it's about Leonid Massine. Jason, if you, let's just dive into that and then we'll talk about it right afterwards.
Leonid Massine was not only a choreographer, he was also a magnetic performer with an enormous international following. And in 1932, Massine was considered the greatest choreographer in the world.
I think Massine was one of the great stylists, and his work was not strictly classical ballets. They were ballets with classical technique in them.
Massine promised Diaghilev that he'll create 100 ballets. And meanwhile, he created something like 113. They were so full of innovations. And each ballet had a different approach, different theme, different characterization, different mood.
Massine wasn't that easy to describe because I think he was always discovering something new. I mean, Rouge et Noir, it's amazing. The way I used to be thrown through the air. And I used to have to be boring in the back bend or doubled up. It was the most modern work that had been done.
Massine's talents were dearly coveted by Debussy.
Okay. Massine is just, all roads keep leading to him in this story. And I wonder sort of where you see his legacy the most now, when you think of Massine and all that he did and all those hundreds of ballets and all those collaborations.
Yeah, really. So I noticed that there was one question that someone had asked, which was I can't remember the name of the person, but it's one of the Q&A questions. Was Alexandra Danilova alive when we were making the film?
Yeah, this is Elizabeth Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And no, sadly, so the three people that we had already lost before we started this film and who just broke my heart were Tamar Tumanova, the last of the three baby ballerinas, Alexandra Danilova, and Leonid Massine. And Leonid Massine, I mean, I personally felt like he got short-shrifted in dance history because Balanchine really overshadowed him. And Balanchine lived longer, and Balanchine, got Lincoln Kirstein, and I felt like let's shine a spotlight on this kind of unheralded, somewhat forgotten choreographer who, as George Sorge said, did over 100 ballets. I think his use of classical music is probably one of the one of the biggest gifts that I think we might take for granted. And it was so outrageously controversial when he started choreographing to those.
Right, as Freddie says, how dare you, the critics said, how dare you use our music for that? I also, looking at those clips, I mean, even though there was a period where I think in the modernist period, things went to a very minimalist approach to dance, almost like as it did in painting, to say, what is the essence of what we're doing here? You see in the wake of that, certainly in the last 40 to 50 years, that there's room again for a lot of the work, the kind of work that Massine was doing, that was experimental or lush or full of design or groundbreaking in their own ways, that you know, in a way the pendulum has swung back a little bit, I think, for at least a lot of the ballets I particularly enjoy. So he, I think, had an outsized influence, even though he might not have lived to see his renaissance that way.
But I also think we've seen some Massine ballets restaged, and they're very, very hard. It's very, very hard to capture the essence of what he was trying to do, because dancers today, if you look at the clips in the film where Alexandra Danilova and Freddie Franklin are dancing Gaieté Parisienne, and, you know, Freddie actually said it took us, you know, 5 years to get that thing right. There's this, and we've watched those parts of the film with ballet choreographer friends of ours today, and they'll say dancers don't move that way with that kind of absolute abandon. The way that, you know, Danilova can just throw herself around, and that was something that, to really master one of the Diaghilev or one of the Massine ballets, you needed to be able to just dance with abandon. And now I do feel like ballet, the technique is so far superior to anything that the Ballet Russe dancers had mastered. But I think what's traded off sometimes is that ability to dance with that Massine abandon.
I love it. Okay, there's a couple more questions coming in. Paul Barnes wants you to talk about that lovely moment when Freddie and Tamara did the duet at the reunion. It was so moving and beautiful.
Is that with George Zorich and Natalie Krasovska when they did that duet? I'm trying to remember.
I am wondering that same thing too. We have that actually. We could go to that clip and maybe you could speak to that, and then we'll come back into the next question. Let's just watch this.
I think he was really born to be a dancer.
Oh, I think he has wonderful line, wonderful style. We danced a lot together. The first time we met, we was very young. I would not say what year it was, but I knew George's mother, and George knew my mother and my grandmother. And you did ask me once to marry you.
Oh, yes. I had her picture ahead of my bed, just like an icon. And little did I know what the devil was saying over my head.
Okay?
No, I come from here. That's your bench. Oh, yes, I come from here. That's the bench.
Юрочка, ты можешь. Я столько раз это все ставила, все. Ты можешь. Потому что ты слишком долго здесь задерживаешься. А если ты пройдешь опять вперед, пройти ты ни разу не прошел вперед.
А к чему?
Сказать, что
Я
вот так, вот там.
чтобы вперед ходить.
Ну, нет, это на минутку выйдешь, чуть-чуть ты побреешься, и все это чудно будешь выглядеть. Волосы мы тебе такое...
Schmaltzing me up. We do a Giselle kiss, and here is lovelier girl than I thought. Look at her hands.
Oh,
so tender, so beautiful. I mean, Dana, it goes back to what you were saying, turning 40 years old and thinking about how are you going to age? What's going to happen across your life? What's the spirit going forward?
And that scene, so we spent a long weekend with George Zorich in March before the June reunion. And we hadn't obviously met Natalie yet, but Natalie was calling him relentlessly that whole weekend. And he was so resistant to doing that moment and doing that, because they actually did it on stage at the reunion. And he started complaining to us that weekend. And so we were like, oh my God, who is this Natalie Krasovska? She's clearly a woman with a will. And then when we got there and he was still complaining, and then we met Natalie, we had breakfast with Natalie in the hotel cafe, and that was what she was living for. She'd spent, 6 months preparing to do this scene with George. And so all of that coaxing and everything was something that she had been sort of rehearsing for in her mind, because it was very, very hard. And it was also just so moving to watch the two of them together.
Well, and neither of us speak Russian, but it goes to show that it didn't matter that neither of us spoke Russian. You could understand the intent of what they were saying to each other, the emotion of it, the intensity of it, and film and shoot and frame accordingly, because what they were communicating through their faces and body and laughter and gesturing, it was just absolutely crystal clear. When we first met Natalie that day, I remember when we met at a restaurant, we didn't really know what she looked like. She had been there waiting for us. We walked in, and the host of the restaurant, the maitre d', said, well, because we said there's a Russian lady, he said, well, there's a lady with a funny accent who says she's from Texas. Because she had been living in Dallas for decades at that point. And when we finally filmed Natalie at her house several months later, she had these American flags, small American desktop flags in the window of her house. And she proudly said, I am real American.
Because remember, these dancers had no citizenship whatsoever. It's something that Natalie actually says in the film. When they had to get on that boat and leave just as World War II was breaking out, they literally had no passports. And so for her to receive her American citizenship, she was very, very proud. And yes, at that restaurant, she proudly told the woman she was Texan.
It is such a phenomenon in all their lives of being uprooted and moving constantly through the world, whether it's on trains across America or into South America or back to Europe, or just this boomerang of a life, and often so threadbare, these companies just operating on fumes. The dancers barely eating.
Oh, barely eating and sharing hotel rooms. They would trick the hotels so that like 4 of them, one of them would get the room, because they were paying for all of their own food and their own hotel rooms, and really living like vagabonds out of their one suitcase. And so yeah, one of them would rent a hotel room, and then 4 others would pile in secretly. They were unbelievable, really unbelievable.
So resourceful. David Vogel has another question. Who wrote the script? It and its elegant narration brings the footage so totally alive within the context of the period. David's a fan.
That's beautiful.
So
Thank
sweet.
you. We had decided, we fought a long time against having a narrator, but then decided that there were certain elements of just certain facts and certain pieces that none of the other people in the film, the characters, could tell, and it would just be more efficient in a way to get some of those pieces out. But then we decided, well, let's make that narrator a character, because let's make this whole film almost like a fairy tale. And it's, this is the fairy tale narrator. It's the grandmother who's opening the book to read the book to you. And so Dana and I wrote the script, and of course we had other friends and collaborators, and our editor, our co-producer, revise with us. But we did write it, and that character then was embodied by a miracle through a connection by a friend to Marion Seldes, the great late Broadway actress and film actress, who embodies that kind of elegance and wisdom. And then when we went to record her in New York at a sound studio, until that moment we had no idea that she had a direct connection to the Ballet Russe, because she had actually been brought on stage when the Ballet Russe was in Manhattan in the war years, brought on stage to help fill out the company. Marion's a huge, very tall person, and she knew the dancers, because what happened actually was that she started reading right through the script. And we said, wow, how do you know all these names? How can you say Ria Bushinska? And she said, well, I knew them. I knew them all. And so that was unfortunate.
The unseen hand moved you.
Yes, I have to say though that I in particular was very adamant that we not have a narrator. It was the first film we'd ever made that we ended up having one, and it wasn't until we settled on this notion of having a grandmotherly voice telling a fairy tale that I could open my heart to that tool.
Yeah, it is such an elegant way to tell that story. I'm going to jump us to another clip. Jason, can we go to the Freddie off the boat at the Met? We'll skip the next clip and go to the one after that, because I want to really bring Freddie Franklin, who is as great a storyteller as he is a dancer, into this story. And let's just go into that world for a moment.
We're herded into taxis and taken straight to the Metropolitan Opera House.
Right away on the stage, Massine, look, quickly, take your places.
And Mr. Massey said, Freddie, hello, your costumes in your dressing room. There's a dress rehearsal of Devil's Holiday, and of course you'll be performing it tonight.
So we rehearse, and same night we dance.
None of us had seen the ballet for 3 months. We hadn't had a class in weeks. I remember that I stood in the wings and I was looking a bit peculiar, and they gave me a shot of brandy. I would never have got through it. I could not have done it. The brandy got me through.
Despite their harrowing escape from Europe, the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo rose to the occasion and went on to break all prior box office records at the Metropolitan Opera House. The two Ballet Russe companies were now stranded in the United States, and Saul Hurok chose to represent them both. Each set off on separate whistle-stop tours to places where ballet had never before been seen. Small-town America was about to get a double dose of the Ballet Russe.
We were in the covered wagons of the ballet in this country. We were. We would go to towns, many towns. They just look, open-mouthed audiences, never seen anything like us. Strange people with strange names and strange looking, wearing strange costumes, doing strange things. No way, no. imagine if you go to anywhere, a small town, and suddenly you push on the stage something like Bacchanal. They've never heard of Dali. They don't know what's going on. They look there and think, what is this? They almost had us locked up because they'd never seen anything like this. Oh, the set.
Wow. Bring us into Freddie Franklin's life after his days with Ballet Russe were over. What then happened with Freddie and even your time in New York hanging with him? We were telling stories this morning when we were all on a call.
Well, you know, literally as we were starting to film the reunion in June of 2000, that was the moment when Freddie started being sought after by ballet companies around the US to act as a character dancer, or to be on stage as a character dancer. Obviously, he could no longer do a full-on, you know, Romeo. But it was amazing. He could move quite well, and to sort of restage a lot of the dances that he had danced as a younger man. So when you would walk into his apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, there was an ever-growing set of photos of Freddie surrounded by the members of the American Ballet Theater at the opening night of one of the performances that he had played a supernumerary in. So, and they all corresponded with a key birthday. So he had his 90th birthday, and he was on stage surrounded by ABT dancers and the opening night of Swan Lake. And then, you know, on his 95th birthday, another one of those group portraits, Freddie on stage, opening night of Romeo and Juliet, and there he is, you know, he played he married Romeo and Juliet. Anyway, just unbelievable. And he had another one when he was 97. So his life, he never really left the stage, and he traveled. I mean, you see the background of Freddie's interview changing. It's because we had to literally follow him around the world or around the United States. And in fact, when the film came out, he called one day and he said, "Isn't it marvelous? I was just taking the subway and someone asked me for my autograph." And you know, we hung up, and I think Dan turned, I said, "Isn't that amazing?" And Dan's like, "I think it's amazing that he was 96 and he was, you know, on the subway and he had the wherewithal to stop and give an autograph." So that's Freddie.
But also, we would have dinners. Freddie and his husband Bill had this penthouse apartment, and we would have these dinners that would go on till the wee hours of the morning, just talking about life and dance and all these other stories that Freddie had. And it would maybe be about 1 a.m. Dana and I would start to wilt a little, and Freddie would turn to Bill and say, "Bill, darling, you know, let's just open one more bottle of wine." Freddie, who, you know, it was about 5'6" at that point probably, and rail thin, and he enjoyed life. He enjoyed food, he enjoyed drink. And when Freddie passed away, there was a beautiful memorial service for him in Lincoln Center, and then at Juilliard there was a reception in one of the dance studios at Juilliard, which was catered, and they had the cocktail of for the reception was one that was Freddie's only concession really to age, which was, instead of having just straight vodka on the rocks, Freddie in his last couple of years for the electrolytes would mix in some lemon lime Gatorade, and so they were serving up the Freddie, which, you know, I'm not a Gatorade fan, but I had one.
Oh, good Freddie.
Yeah.
I think I watched this film 3 times in preparation for this conversation, and I could not get to the end of it without weeping. And it was that framing, well, it was the whole film and all that is underneath it, the beauty of it, the story of all those people, and the framing of it, but also something in the credits when you see even there where you're giving the film in honor of people who are in the film but have passed since you started it. And I'm wondering is anyone who in the film is still alive, who's on this side of the river still?
The person who we're in touch with most regularly is Wakefield Poole. He was one of the younger ones. I think he was 70 maybe when we filmed him. And he's living in Jacksonville, Florida. But yes, one by one, they left. I mean, for me, I remember the first person we lost after finishing the film, and it was just like, I remember sitting at my computer and someone sent us a note that Natalie had just passed away unexpectedly. And that was just, because, I mean, you see her in the film and she's so beautifully dramatic, and she would have so loved coming to an opening night of that film and walking down the aisle and being appreciated in all of her glory. I think that was the first time that I cried and couldn't stop. But yeah, as far as I know, the only one that I know that we, like I said, are regularly in touch with is Wake. Can you think of anyone down?
No.
Yeah, it's been. Yeah.
I mean, we lost Yvonne, we lost Miguel, we lost Freddie, we lost Irina, we lost Natalie. I mean, it was one after the other. George Zorich, you know, and we went to screenings with, all of them were around enough so that when we would hit a particular city that they happened to live in and we were showing it in a theater, that they would be the
oh wait, Raven. Is Raven still, I think Raven is still alive. Or did she?
I think she might have passed. But anyway, so they would be the special guest of honor.
Right.
For the Q&A sessions, which were so wonderful all around the world. And then with Freddie, you know, Freddie and Irina both, because we were so close to them, I feel like they're not gone. I mean, I do feel like we've imbibed them in a certain way that that spirit lives up profoundly, both of them. I remember we had this thing where we got Irina's age wrong by a year, just in a social event thing. We thought she was turning 90. We were heading down to Australia to do something around the film. And we had a friend at the time who was the marketing director of the Australian Ballet, who became a good friend. And he passed it on to David McAllister, who was the artistic director. And David panicked and said, Jesus, I got to go out and get her 24 roses. You know, we can't let Irina turn 90 without it. And she was turning 89, it turned out. But it was good because we spent time with her up on the Gold Coast of Australia that year. And she died not long after that.
Yeah. If we had tried to wait till her actual 90th birthday, we would have missed her. One of the things that was an offshoot of making this film that we didn't expect was how inspiring Raven Wilkinson's story was. Misty Copeland, after seeing Ballet Russe, ended up, you know, and Misty had gone through her whole life thinking that she was, you know, the first Black ballerina. And seeing Ballet Russe, she was like, oh my God, I have to go and find this woman. And so Misty and Raven Wilkinson became very, very dear friends. And that is incredibly fulfilling as a filmmaker to see your film going out in the world and actually inspiring connections.
There was another Raven moment when the film was opening up. Newsday newspaper did a arts cover story about Raven with a big picture of Raven on the front. And Raven said, if she went down to the newsstand, she happened to see Newsday, and she looked at this arts cover and thought, wow, it's so cool that they're doing something about Rosa Parks. And because she could not imagine that she would be on the cover of that. And she told us she looked at it, and then it began to dawn on her, she began to read the text around it, that it was her. And so there is this, like the subway story with Freddie, where Freddie said, you've made me famous all over again. I mean, there's something about the film that also, in the very last twilight of the lives of several of these dancers, brought them to a new appreciation, a new audience, just helped them elevate one step before they all went to heaven.
Mm-hmm. And Bob Hawk just wrote in and said that Raven has passed. Raven.
Yeah. Bob, thank you for bringing us this project.
Yeah. I wonder what it was like to watch this film now in the midst of the pandemic, in the times we're in. What was going through your heads as you saw it again and knew that all these people were gone, but this film lives?
I think, that's a hard question. it's more that the reminder again that living a life in the arts is a gift, and that as ephemeral as people's lives and the dance that they danced at that moment on stage was, it's still like we managed to capture it, and it's there. And it was such a blessing for us to be with all of those people. Sorry, I'm not doing a great job with this answer because it's hard for me to articulate it right now. But I guess just the importance of living that rich life that's rich not because of any kind of monetary reward, but is rich because of experience. I mean, I feel like that's what we're going through in the middle of COVID right now. I keep thinking back on how important all of the deep memories are, and the experiences that I'm looking forward to going back to when we get out of this.
Well, also what they soldiered through, from Irina Baranova starting out in the arms of her mother and father as white Russians fleeing the revolution and living in horrible conditions in Europe. Natalie Krasovska bouncing around without a passport. Freddie, evacuating out of England and for World War II. All the things, the poverty, the wars, the depression, all the things they went through, and yet they managed to hang on to this optimistic view that somehow one day this darkness will lift, and that they'll be able to, in some fashion, continue doing what they were doing and bring light and joy into the world. And I feel that's something that is worth holding on to now in this moment, when times can be dark, times can be isolating. We don't know when any of this is going to end, with our lives upended. That it's for me to hang on to that they were through repeatedly an awful lot of trauma and an awful lot of dislocation, and still had that optimistic take that they're going to make their art at some point somehow.
I was so struck, the baby ballerinas that are part of this story, and how these dancers begin at such young girls, and by the time they're 13 or 14, they're in these dance companies, and they never look back. They move through the world. And just a couple of weekends ago, I was at home here in San Francisco watching the NDI 2020 Zoom Gala. Usually it's a live performance, as everyone in Santa Fe knows, of all the dancers from the Dance Barn programs, the NDI programs, which I'm sure people in the audience know that they're probably the Ballet Russe and Balanchine and the links of the tributaries of all this dance that even goes into the NDI now. Anyway, I was watching all those young dancers, and I was thinking, these dancers are the ages of those baby ballerinas, those young people. And I was thinking about the times we're in, and that they are going through so much. They danced at home with such exuberance and such passion and such life. And even though the times are hard and we're facing all this uncertainty and unknown, out of that may just come the most beautiful part of their life, the things that they're finding inside of them that dance gives. And I felt these two things linked: the Ballet Russe, dance programs in Santa Fe, the moment we're in.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
I will just add that the reason that I even know about this program as a San Francisco girl is my friend Danny Silver, who has worked for 18 years with this program, retires in 2 days. And she's the one that brought me into that world. So thank you, Danny. Okay, let's go to Stravinsky, because Jason was telling us the story this morning in the rehearsal about the role of Stravinsky in the birth of the Santa Fe Opera, and Stravinsky's work being presented in the cathedral. And Jason has got this beautiful clip from your extras that we want to see before we close out. So let's go to one last clip together. Resonating Santa Fe, Resonating New Mexico.
with Mr. B. The choreography didn't frighten me. We hadn't reached that yet. But it was the music. We arrived for the first rehearsal, and I heard this music, and it wasn't, you see, for me, the kind of music I had heard before, and suddenly I started pouring with tears in front of Mr. B. And just as I was pouring tears, Mr. Diaghilev walked in. He said, "What have you been doing to that little one, Lucy, to have her in tears?" And I said, "I'm very sorry, but you'll be sending me back to London because I can't understand the music." And Diaghilev said, "You will be here tomorrow evening, same time, to start work, and I will come and bring somebody who will help you." So that evening, Diaghilev arrived after dinner with this very nice little man, and of course I didn't know who he really was. And it was Stravinsky he had brought. Stravinsky called me over, and he said, "Well, it's very simple. I'm going to ask you to try and learn by sound every instrument in that orchestra." And from that moment, I could deal with any concerto, anything, because he made me by sound.
I love that. We have to make a pilgrimage to Santa Fe, to the opera, when the mist lifts, please.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think the one time I was fortunate enough to see a Peter Sellers opera in Santa Fe, right on the trip to the road trip to Telluride. We started 1 year. It must have been in 2005, actually, with a Peter Sellers opera.
I wonder, in closing, if you'd tell everybody what you're working on now.
Sure. We've been, for the past several years, working on a movie, a documentary about Leonard Cohen, seen through the lens of the song Hallelujah, and his life, the life of that song, which is unexpected since the entire album it was on was rejected by the record label. And this song has become this international hymn that a lot of people don't have any idea it was written by Leonard Cohen. So that is a movie that we've almost entirely shot, that we're well down in the edit with. There are a few more things we'd like to shoot. That would be nice if we can get back on airplanes safely at some point soon.
When we can.
Yes, when we can. But that's what we're working on now. And Leonard Cohen, you look at the Ballet Russe, Leonard Cohen certainly was phenomenally influential, artistic, graceful, legendary artist. And to be, anytime he's on screen or an audio recording from a radio broadcast, you just can't pull yourself away. It's completely gripping.
And like the Ballet Russe dancers, he went back on the stage after not having been there for 15 years. He went back on the stage and had his most successful tour of his, for several years really, of his entire life when he was 74. So yeah, he toured from between 74 and when, I think 78. And that was the highlight of his career. So again, it's another one of those, oh, yes.
I thank you, Dan, and I thank you, Dana, for spending your 34th wedding anniversary with all of us. And I want to thank Jason and the Center for Contemporary Arts and NDI and the Lenzik and all of you who have been with us for this evening. Before we close, we have one last clip we're going to take you out. Anything else anyone wants to add before we say farewell?
Just thank you so much for being here for a wonderful Q&A and moderating, and to Jason and the team for inviting us, for bringing this film back into people's lives again, and the chance to share this way. And Dana and I just keep looking at each other thinking, this is a great way to celebrate an anniversary.
Oh, absolutely. And really, Jason, and just thank you so much for keeping this film alive. You know, you make these works, and they're obviously out, if you're lucky, they're out there and have an exuberant life, but then they go away. And so it was so incredibly generous of you to have us bring the film back this way. And when we got your email a few weeks ago asking if we could do this, it was just such a lift in this moment of time. So thank you so much. And I just want to say one thing about the clip. The clip is not, it's not a clip that's part of the film itself, it's an extra. So if you're wanting to hang around and watch it, it's something that's new.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
That's it.
It was 1918. I was 4 years old, and I was out with my mother on a tram car in Liverpool, where I was born, and there was crowds outside waving flags, and it was an armistice. And that night, a gramophone came into our house where there was a party going on, and I remember looking into this great big mahogany horn, wondering where all the music came from, and the people were dancing around, and I got off that sideboard and started to move. And that's really how it started. I was 17, and it was useless my staying in Liverpool, so they sent me to London, and I saw an advertisement in the paper, tap dancer needed for Paris. I went, I could tap dance, I did an audition, and lo and behold, I had a job. There were 10 boys, and we were known as the Jackson Troops. And my leading lady was Josephine Baker. And we had to do anything, tap dancing on buckets. We were dressed up and as any kind of animals. We did everything. I was there a year and a half. I got back to London, and then I did an audition for Anton Dolin, and Mr. Dolin said to me, "Freddie, it's about time you became serious about your art. Alicia and I are having a company, and you're in it."
He had just returned from Paris. All the kicking and everything, not the classical ballet, you see. And that's where Freddie was very versatile.
My actual debut into the ballet was doing Harlequin with Markova as Columbine in Fokines Carnival. And I was petrified.
When Diaghilev first saw me, when I was 10 years of age, he came to the class in Chelsea, and somebody whispered in the ear of my governess, this was the greatest man in ballet who had come in. And then he suddenly turned to my teacher and said, "And tell me, what does that little thing do here? Has she any little thing she dances yet?" She said, "Yes, one. Rubinstein's Waltz Caprice." He said, Would she dance it for us? Apparently, what struck him was I was doing double pirouettes and things that nobody else at that age could do. Well, apparently I must have had some kind of funny spirit.
I was born right in the midst of a revolution in 1917. My mother was very, very much in love with the theater. So she took me to a performance when I was about 11 years of age. And coming home, I became a menace. I started to hop around and so to protect the china and the furniture and things around the house, my mother decided to take me to the ballet. My mother, she was in love with Paris. And so when I was about 13, she took me along. And then I was taking the classes from Preobrazhenska, and very soon afterwards she put me in a higher level class where Irina Baronova and Tamara Tumanova, the baby ballerinas. Then I shortly was with Nijinsky's company in London, and I ran into Tamara Tumanova and her mother. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "You have to come immediately tomorrow to audition to Mr. Massine." And I thought, my God, Mr. Massine, at that time I heard what an ingenious, magnificent choreographer and dancer he was. So Tamara insisted, so I came there, and I thought I was just awful. That I didn't do a thing well. However, after the audition, he sent me to see Colonel de Basile, and he offered me a 2-year contract.
I started studying piano when I was 3. They would put pillows up on the bench so I could reach the keys. And there was a teacher who came in the basement and gave ballet lessons. So I started my first ballet, and I was a very shy child, typical American Indian, you know, sort of, if I played the piano, played a piece, I'd hide my head afterwards so nobody could see me. Anyway, I couldn't understand who's that person wanting me to put my feet like this. Oh, that's awful, you know.
Oh gosh, this goes back to Chicago, where I was born. And I had a cousin, and I used to go watch her ballet classes, her dance classes in those days. It was like elocution, they called it a little tap, a little ballet, a little what have you. And little by little, I got involved. So the teacher said to my mom, "Why don't you give the boy dancing lessons?" You know, in Chicago, the reputation, Al Capone and John Dillinger and all those great gangsters, so-called. And I'd be out in the baseball field, which is, I didn't even know what baseball was or couldn't care less, truthfully. But, you know, I'd be out there doing glissade, samplé, changement. The other boys, "Hey, sissy, get back." You know, it didn't matter. I was going to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't care what people said. And my mother was behind me, and my father, too, God bless them. I had really no education. I went to grammar school, a little bit of private high school, never got a diploma or anything. And then I was off with the ballet. I had a dance. I went to New York. This was in the late 40s, and Ballet Russe, they were in town, and then there was to be an audition I heard about. I did the audition, and I got the job. I called my mom, of course, she had a restaurant in Chicago, and helped me sign my contract. We went in a hotel in those days on 57th Street. It's called the Great Northern. I don't think it's there anymore. But, oh, they're so So the Chicago boy made good with the famous Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. That was the beginning.